Hey everyone, welcome to your personalized deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty interesting, how Andy Jassy is putting his own stamp on Amazon.
Yeah, after taking over from the legendary Jeff Bezos, it's a tough act to follow.
It really is. I mean, Bezos is practically synonymous with Amazon at this point, but Jassy's been there since the early days too.
Right, absolutely. And he's not just some random exec. He built AWS from the ground up, which basically means...
He turned Amazon into the tech giant it is today.
Exactly. So his vision for the company is, well, let's just say it's worth paying attention to.
Okay, so we've got some seriously in-depth analysis to dig into today.
Multiple sources, actually. Reports, articles, interviews, the whole shebang.
So consider it as your crash course in Jassy's leadership playbook.
But with a twist, we're not just talking about the business moves. We're going deep on the cultural shifts he's making.
And why those matter. Not just for Amazon employees,
but for anyone who cares about the future of work itself.
Where do we even begin with all this? Well, I think the best place to start is with Jassy himself. I mean, the guy's background is fascinating.
Yeah, he's not your typical CEO.
Right. Not even close. He's a builder, a tech guy at heart. And that definitely shapes his approach to leadership.
So how would you describe his leadership style?
Very data-driven. He's all about accountability, measurable outcomes. That kind of thing.
Which I guess makes sense given his AWS background.
It's a pretty stark contrast to Bezos, though, who was much more...
instinct-driven.
Yeah, you could say that. But here's the thing. Even though their styles are different, Jassy still holds on to those core Amazon values.
Yeah, like high standards, frugality.
That constant push for innovation, the day one mentality.
It's funny, though, because according to Wikipedia, Jassy's compensation is heavily stock-based.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which I find kind of interesting. It suggests a real long-term commitment to the company.
Absolutely. He's not just thinking about quarterly earnings. He's playing the long game here.
Which brings us to his strategic priorities. What's on Jassy's radar?
Well, AI is definitely at the top of the list.
Yeah.
I mean, the investments they're making are massive.
I read somewhere that analysts are predicting something like $100 billion by 2025.
That's right. And it's not just hype. Jassy sees AI as a once-in-a-generation opportunity.
And he's betting big on AWS to lead the charge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're building out AI capabilities like crazy.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just cloud infrastructure.
So what else is he focusing on?
Generative AI.
Generative AI.
Yeah, like ChatGPT.
Oh, okay, I've heard of that.
It's basically AI that can create new content. Text, images, music, all sorts of stuff.
Based on the data it's been trained on.
Right. And Jassy sees it as a key driver of future innovation. So he wants Amazon to be at the forefront.
I see. But here's where things get a little confusing to me.
What do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, you've got Jassy pumping billions into AI.
Right.
But on the other hand, he's also all about streamlining Amazon, cutting costs, layoffs, restructuring, the whole shebang.
Yeah, I can see how that might seem contradictory.
Because it kind of is.
Well, it's more like a balancing act, I think.
Okay, how so?
He's pushing for growth in key areas like AI. But at the same time, he's laser focused on making Amazon more efficient.
So it's like he's trying to do two things at once.
Exactly. Grow and streamline. He wants to maintain that startup mentality.
Yeah.
Even as the company gets bigger and bigger.
Okay, I get that part. But then there's also the elephant in the room. The thing that everyone's been talking about.
You mean the return to office mandate?
The one and only, 5 days a week in the office. No exceptions. I mean, what's the rationale behind that? And is it actually working?
Well, it's definitely been controversial.
That's putting it mildly.
One argument I've heard, and this comes from John Rossman, a former Amazon executive.
Okay.
He says it's all about fostering collaboration and accountability.
So the idea is that being physically present in the office leads to better communication, more spontaneous interactions.
Exactly. And that ultimately leads to more creativity and innovation.
Okay, I can see that. But hasn't there been a ton of pushback from employees?
Oh, yeah, definitely. A lot of people are concerned about morale and talent retention.
I mean, I get it. It feels like a pretty big gamble to alienate your workforce, especially when attracting and retaining top talent is so crucial.
It definitely is. And there are plenty of other tech companies out there offering remote or hybrid work options. So Amazon might be putting themselves at a disadvantage.
So is Jassy just being stubborn? Or is there a deeper strategy at play here? I mean, it seems risky to force everyone back to the office, like the...
I don't think it's about stubbornness. I think it's more about Jassy's belief that...
that in-person interaction is key to Amazon's success.
Right. He sees it as essential to the company's culture. and a way to bring back that spark, that sense of urgency and shared mission that drove Amazon in its early days.
So he's basically trying to recreate that scrappy startup vibe, even within a company that's now a global behemoth.
It's an interesting approach for sure.
It is, but I can also see why some employees might find it a bit jarring, especially those who joined during the remote work era.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the tension lies. Jassy's betting that the benefits of this cultural shift,
Increased collaboration, innovation, accountability.
Yes, exactly. Those will outweigh the potential downsides.
it's a big gamble. We'll have to see how it plays out.
We will. But for now, let's zoom out a bit. How does this all fit into Jassy's overall vision for Amazon? What's he ultimately trying to achieve?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't
It
it?
is. But from what I've gathered, it seems like Jassy is aiming to position Amazon not just to survive, but to thrive in a world that's changing faster than ever.
Okay, so how's he planning to do that?
Well, he's got this dual focus. On the one hand, technological leadership,
Which means,
dominance in AI and cloud computing, basically making sure Amazon stays ahead of the curve.
makes sense. And on the other hand,
Operational excellence, creating a lean, agile organization that can move quickly and adapt to new challenges.
so it's about being both a tech powerhouse and a lean, mean operating machine.
Exactly. He wants to combine Amazon's massive scale with the agility of a startup.
That's a pretty ambitious goal.
Okay.
But are these changes actually working? Are we seeing any tangible results from Jassy's leadership so far?
Yeah.
Well, it's still early days. But on the AI front, we're definitely seeing a significant shift in resources and focus. AWS is rolling out tons of new AI-powered services, and there's a lot of buzz around Amazon's internal efforts to leverage AI for everything.
Give me an example.
Optimizing logistics, personalizing customer experiences, you name it.
So it's not just about selling AI services to other companies, it's about weaving AI into the very fabric of Amazon's operations.
Exactly. Jassy seems to believe that AI is the key to unlocking new levels of efficiency, innovation, and customer satisfaction. And in a way, it ties back to his focus on data. AI thrives on data, and Amazon has mountains of it.
That's a really good point. What about the cost cutting and streamlining? Has that had any noticeable impact?
Well, it's definitely shaken things up internally. The layoffs were a major wake-up call for a company that had gotten used to seemingly limitless growth.
Right, I can imagine.
Yeah, the restructuring has led to some tough decisions, like scaling back or even dissolving certain teams and projects that weren't seen as essential or profitable.
So he's not afraid to make tough calls, even if they're unpopular.
It seems that way. Jassy's clearly willing to challenge the status quo and make big moves, even if it means disrupting the way things have always been done at Amazon.
It's bold, that's for sure. But is it all about cold, hard efficiency? Or is there a human element to his leadership as well?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, how does Jassy actually interact with employees? What's his communication style like?
From what I've gathered, he's very direct, straightforward, doesn't sugarcoat things or beat around the bush.
No corporate jargon.
Not really. He values transparency and expects the same from his team.
Interesting. So he's all about clear communication, but is he also data-driven in his interactions with employees?
Definitely. He relies heavily on data to inform his decisions. But he also understands the importance of building relationships.
So he's not just some kind of emotionless robot CEO.
No, not at all. He's demanding, but he's also fair and approachable. He encourages open dialogue and wants to hear different perspectives.
Even if they challenge his own views.
Yeah, he seems to genuinely value feedback,
Yeah.
which is refreshing.
It is. But let's be real. Not everyone's going to be happy with every decision a CEO makes, especially in a company as large and complex as Amazon. So how does Jassy handle dissent or pushback from employees?
Well, from what I've read, he's actually quite open to feedback. He encourages employees to voice their concerns.
Really?
Yeah, he's created channels for employees to raise issues and share ideas. And he's known for taking those suggestions seriously.
So he's not just paying lip service to employee feedback, he's actually listening and acting on it.
That's the impression I get. Of course, he's not going to agree with every complaint or suggestion.
Right.
But he's willing to engage in constructive dialogue and explain his reasoning. He sees employee feedback as a valuable source of insight, a way to improve decision-making.
Okay, so he's trying to strike a balance between being decisive and being open to input.
Right, which is a tough balance to strike,
Exactly.
especially when you're leading a company like Amazon.
Exactly. But there's got to be some pushback, right? I mean, the RTO mandate alone has sparked a lot of controversy.
Absolutely. And it's not just about where people work. It's about the larger cultural shift that Jassy is trying to engineer. Some employees see it as a positive step, a way to reinvigorate Amazon's culture and foster greater collaboration.
Right. And others see it as a step backward, a move towards a more rigid and hierarchical structure.
That stifles creativity and autonomy.
Exactly.
It sounds like Jassy is walking a tightrope here.
He is. On the one hand, he's got this vision of a more efficient, technologically driven Amazon.
And on the other hand, he's got to manage employee expectations and navigate a rapidly changing world of work.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It really is.
Yeah.
So how does he manage all of this without losing sight of the big picture?
That's a great question. And I think Jassy's strength lies in his ability to stay focused on the long-term goals while also being pragmatic and adaptable in the face of short-term challenges. He's willing to experiment, to try new things, and to course correct when necessary.
So it's not just about sticking rigidly to a plan. It's about being flexible and responsive to changing circumstances. Exactly. And I think that's a crucial quality for any leader in today's business environment. Things are moving so fast, and the only way to stay ahead of the curve is to be constantly learning, adapting, and evolving.
That's a great point. But let's not forget about the competitive landscape. Amazon is facing some serious challenges from rivals like Microsoft and Google, not to mention a whole host of startups nipping at its heels. How is Jassy responding to this pressure?
He's not shying away from it, that's for sure. Jassy recognizes that Amazon can't rest on its laurels.
Yeah.
It needs to keep innovating, expanding into new markets, and finding ways to differentiate itself from the competition.
But how do you do that when you're already a massive company with a global footprint? Isn't there a risk of becoming too big and slow to react to new threats?
That's the billion-dollar question. And it's one that Jassy is grappling with every day. His strategy seems to be twofold. First, double down on areas where Amazon already has a strong advantage,
Like?
cloud computing and e-commerce.
Okay. And second,
Be bold and invest heavily in emerging technologies like AI and robotics that have the potential to disrupt entire industries.
so play to your strengths while also preparing for the future. It's a smart approach, but it's not without its risks.
Of course not.
Yeah.
There's always a chance that those big bets won't pay off, or that competitors will move faster or outmaneuver Amazon in some unexpected way.
Right. But it sounds like Jassy's willing to take that risk.
He is. He's not afraid to make big, audacious bets, even if it means failing sometimes.
That's a refreshing perspective. It seems like too many CEOs today are playing it safe, afraid to take risks that might jeopardize their short-term performance.
I think Jassy understands that in the long run, the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. If Amazon wants to remain a dominant force in the tech world, it needs to be willing to push boundaries, experiment, and yes, even fail sometimes.
That's an important lesson for anyone, really, not just CEOs.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the bigger picture. Jassy's leadership at Amazon is obviously significant in its own right. But I'm curious about the broader implications. How might his actions impact the future of work, not just within Amazon, but beyond?
That's a fascinating question. And it's one that a lot of people are asking. Jassy's vision for Amazon, with its emphasis on efficiency, data-driven decision-making, and a highly collaborative workplace, could become a blueprint for other companies to follow.
So his actions at Amazon could have ripple effects across entire industries.
Potentially, yes. And those effects could be both positive and negative.
In what way?
Well, on the positive side, Jassy's focus on efficiency could lead to greater productivity and innovation across the board. But on the other hand, it could also lead to a more demanding and stressful work environment.
With less flexibility and autonomy for individual employees.
Exactly. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Increased efficiency and innovation may come at the cost of work-life balance and employee well-being.
That's definitely something to think about. And what about those who thrive in remote or flexible work settings? Would there be a place for them in this future?
That's a crucial question. If Jassy's model, with its emphasis on in-person interaction, becomes the dominant paradigm, it could limit opportunities for individuals who value autonomy and flexibility. It's important to consider the diverse needs and preferences of the workforce.
You're right. This raises an important point. As we ponder this potential future of work, we need to ask ourselves, what does this mean for the relationship between companies and their employees?
It's a question that demands careful consideration. It requires a shift on both sides. Companies adopting this model would need to prioritize employee well-being, create support systems to prevent burnout.
And be more transparent in their communication.
Exactly. Transparency and trust are essential. And on the employee's side, well, they would need to be more proactive in advocating for their needs and setting boundaries.
So it's a two-way street.
It is. It
Yeah.
calls for a change in mindset on both sides, focusing on working smarter, not just harder.
It sounds like this potential future presents both opportunities and challenges for both companies and employees.
Absolutely. And it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Jassy's vision might be the perfect fit for some, while others might find it restrictive. It highlights the importance of fostering diverse work environments that cater to various work styles and preferences.
This has been incredibly insightful. But before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, what stood out to you the most about Jassy's leadership?
For me, it's his willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, to embrace bold, sometimes controversial ideas. He's not afraid to shake things up and make big bets, even if it means risking short-term setbacks. And I think that's a valuable lesson for leaders in any field.
Great point. And I think that leads perfectly into the next part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the potential long-term implications of Jassy's leadership and what it might mean for the future of work. We'll be right back after a short break.
It's about more than just efficiency, though. It's about creating a culture of ownership.
Ownership.
Yeah, Jassy wants every employee to think and act like an owner, to be invested in the long-term success of the company.
Which I guess ties back to that day one mentality we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wants to maintain that sense of urgency, that drive to constantly innovate and improve.
Even with a workforce of over 1 million people, that's going to be tough.
It is. It's a massive challenge. But Jassy seems determined to make it work. He believes that by empowering employees, giving them more ownership and responsibility, he can unlock a whole new level of performance.
It's an interesting theory, but does it actually work in practice?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And it's one that we'll be exploring in more detail as we continue this deep dive. But for now, let's shift our focus to some of the specific initiatives that Jassy has implemented to try to achieve this vision of a more owner-driven culture. One of the most notable, of course, is the return-to-office mandate.
Right, the one that's been causing all the controversy.
Exactly. And while it's been met with mixed reactions, I think it's important to understand the rationale behind it. Jassy believes that in-person interaction is crucial for building a strong culture of ownership.
How so?
Well, for one thing, it fosters a sense of community and shared purpose. When people are physically together, they're more likely to collaborate, to share ideas, to help each other out.
And that leads to a stronger sense of ownership.
Exactly. When people feel like they're part of a team, when they feel like their contributions matter, they're more likely to take ownership of their work and to go the extra mile.
Okay, I can see that. But what about those who argue that remote work actually increases productivity and creativity?
That's a valid point.
Yeah.
And there's definitely evidence to support that claim. But Jassy's argument is that while remote work might be great for individual productivity, it can sometimes come at the expense of collaboration and innovation.
So he's basically saying that there's a trade-off.
Right. He believes that the benefits of in-person interaction, the increased collaboration, the shared sense of purpose, outweigh the potential gains in individual productivity.
It's a tough call. There's no easy answer.
There isn't. And it's ultimately up to each company to decide what works best for them. But I think it's important to have this conversation, to weigh the pros and cons of different approaches, and to find what strikes the right balance for your organization.
Absolutely. And speaking of balance, Jassy is also trying to strike a balance between fostering a culture of ownership and maintaining Amazon's famous focus on customer obsession.
Which is a pretty tough balancing act, I imagine.
It is, because on the one hand, you want employees to feel empowered to make decisions and take risks.
Right.
But on the other hand, you also want to make sure that those decisions are always in the best interests of the customer.
It's a delicate dance. And it's one that Jassy is navigating carefully. He's made it clear that customer obsession is still Amazon's top priority. But he's also emphasized the importance of empowering employees to make decisions that will benefit the customer in the long run.
So it's not about choosing one over the other. It's about finding a way to make them work together.
Exactly. And that's what makes Jassy's leadership so fascinating. He's not afraid to tackle these tough challenges, to try to find solutions that might seem contradictory at first glance.
He's definitely not afraid to shake things up.
He isn't.
Yeah.
And that's what makes him such an interesting leader to watch. Whether you agree with his approach or not, you can't deny that he's making a significant impact on Amazon and on the broader business world.
That's for sure. So what's the next step in our deep dive? Where do we go from here?
Well, we've talked a lot about Jassy's vision for Amazon, his leadership style, and his efforts to create a more owner-driven culture. But now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty, to look at some of the specific challenges that he's facing and to assess how well he's doing at overcoming them.
Sounds good. let's dive in. All right, so we're back, and we've talked a lot about Andy Jassy's vision for Amazon, his leadership style, those big cultural shifts he's making.
But now it's time to zoom out. Look at the bigger picture.
Exactly, because what Jassy's doing at Amazon, it's not just about one company.
Right. Not at all. It could have ripple effects across entire industries, the way we work, the way companies operate. It's all up for grabs.
So no pressure, Andy. Only the future of work rests on your shoulders.
Right. But seriously, Jassy's leading this massive experiment.
Yeah.
And the results, well, they could reshape the expectations, the experiences of employees across the board.
Okay, so let's play this out. What are some of the potential benefits and drawbacks we might see if Jassy's model becomes the norm?
All right. So on the plus side, Jassy's big on ownership, remember?
Yeah, every employee an owner.
Exactly. And that could translate into more autonomy, more decision-making power for individual employees.
So more responsibility, but also more potential for growth, more impact.
Right. And then there's the potential for increased productivity, faster innovation.
As companies streamline their operations, embrace new technologies like AI.
Exactly. But, and there's always a but.
There's got to be. What's the catch?
Well, there's a risk of heightened pressure
Right.
to constantly perform, which could lead to burnout, especially in a high-intensity environment like Amazon.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with all this emphasis on collaboration, there's also the possibility of work-life boundaries getting blurred,
Leading to an always-on work culture.
which a lot of people are trying to get away from these days.
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of remote work.
Right. What about those who actually thrive in remote or flexible settings?
Would there even be a place for them in this future? If Jassy's model, with its emphasis on in-person interaction, becomes the dominant one.
It's a good question. And it's one that we need to be asking, because diversity in the workplace, it's not just about demographics, it's about work styles too.
Absolutely. And as we ponder this potential future of work, I think there's an even bigger question we need to grapple with.
What's that?
What does all this mean for the relationship between companies and their employees?
That's a huge question, and I don't think there's an easy answer.
There isn't. But it's a conversation we need to be having. Because if this shift is really happening, it's going to require changes on both sides.
What do you mean?
Well, companies would need to step up, prioritize employee well-being, create support systems to prevent burnout.
Be more transparent in their communication.
Exactly. Foster a culture of trust.
Mm.
And employees, well, they would need to be more proactive, advocate for their needs, set boundaries.
So it's a two-way street?
It is. It's about finding a new balance, a new way of working together.
That benefits both sides.
Right, because at the end of the day, companies and employees, they need each other. They're in this together.
That's a good point to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring the ins and outs of Andy Jassy's leadership at Amazon, his vision, his strategies, the challenges he's facing, and the potential long-term implications of his actions, not just for Amazon, but for all of us.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I think the key takeaway here is that Jassy's story is still being written.
Exactly. This is just the beginning, and it's up to all of us to decide what the next chapter looks like.
So keep exploring, keep learning, keep questioning.
And most importantly, keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.